Around 1000 CE, the Norse explorer Leif Erikson, son of Eric the Red, sailed from Greenland and landed on the coast of North America. He called the new land Vinland, meaning land of wine or land of meadows. Historians believe Vinland was in Newfoundland, Canada, near what's now L'Anse Meadows, where Norse settlement ruins have been found and carbon dated to around 1000 CE. The Norse only stayed a few years. The environment was harsh, supplies were scarce, and relations with local indigenous peoples were tense. They abandoned the site and returned to Greenland, leaving no permanent colony, and they forgot to tell anyone in Europe about this site. So yes, Vikings discovered America first, they just didn't go viral. Centuries later, Europe had an obsession: luxury. From as early as Roman times, merchants followed the Silk Road, a trade network connecting Europe to India and China. Asian goods were seen as symbols of wealth and status in Europe: silk for clothing, spices to flavor and preserve food, porcelain for delicate dishes, and perfumes. Spices like pepper, cinnamon, cloves, and nutmeg were especially prized because they were scarce in Europe and could make bland food flavorful or preserve meats. By the 1400s, Europe was hooked on Asian imports but broke from paying for them. Asian markets historically had a trade surplus with Europe, meaning Europeans imported more goods like silk and spices from Asia than Asia imported from Europe. To pay for these goods, Europeans had to send gold and silver to Asia, causing a drain on Europe's gold and silver reserves. Gold and silver were flowing out of Europe faster than tax collectors could count. In 1400s, Asia was probably the wealthiest and most economically powerful region globally, with advanced civilizations, large populations, and dominant trade networks. Then, in 1453, disaster for Europe. The Ottoman Empire captured Constantinople, modern-day Istanbul. Suddenly, Muslim traders controlled every major land route to Asia. That meant new taxes, middlemen, and high prices. So Portugal said, "Let's sail around Africa." Spain said, "Let's sail west and beat them there." The roundness of the earth had been widely accepted since ancient Greece. By the time of Columbus's voyages in 1492, European scholars were well aware of the Earth's spherical shape. The observation of Earth's curved shadow during lunar eclipses was a key early clue that helped ancient Greek thinkers, especially Aristotle, conclude that the Earth is round. Enter Christopher Columbus, born around 1451 in Genoa, modern-day Italy. The modern country of Italy didn't exist until 1861. The peninsula was a mix of kingdoms and republics like Venice, Florence, and Naples, each richer and prouder than the last. Genoa was a major seafaring and trading city, so it was common for young men to go to sea. By his teens, he was sailing merchant ships around the Mediterranean. He learned navigation, astronomy, and how to not fall off a boat. By the 1470s, he'd sailed to Portugal, England, and maybe even Iceland. He married into a noble Portuguese family and gained access to secret maps and exploration gossip. But Columbus had one big idea: sail west to reach Asia faster. Scholars in this time were debating wasn't the shape of the earth, but rather its size and the feasibility of finding a new route to Asia by sailing westward. Columbus underestimated the Earth's size, which is why he thought he could reach Asia by crossing the Atlantic. If the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans were connected, making the ocean and Earth much larger than estimated, Columbus and his crew would probably have not survived such an extended journey. The combination of extreme distances, limited provisions, dangerous weather, lack of navigational knowledge, and the absence of stopping points like the Americas would have made the journey too dangerous. Columbus would have likely turned back early, or he and his crew would have succumbed to starvation, dehydration, disease, or mutiny long before reaching Asia. He wasn't noble, but he was ambitious to prove the earth was smaller than they thought. Columbus was part of a much bigger European race for exploration and trade. Many explorers, especially from Portugal and Spain, were trying to solve the same problem: how to reach Asia faster and more safely, to gain access to valuable goods like spices, silk, and gold. For years, he pitched his idea: let me sail west to reach Asia faster. Less danger, more profit. Portugal said no. England said no. France said, who are you? But in 1492, Spain's Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand finally said yes, after winning the last crusade against the Moors in Granada that same year. While not a nobleman himself, his experience, persistence, and connections eventually got the attention of the Spanish crown, especially Queen Isabella. In the world of seafaring, practical experience mattered more than noble birth. A faster sea route would mean more profit, fewer taxes, and less reliance on Muslim traders. Christian Europe and the Muslim Ottoman Empire were rivals. Many Europeans wanted to undermine Muslim control of trade and expand Christianity. Some, like Columbus, also hoped to convert Asians and find allies against Islam. Before Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand of Spain agreed to fund Columbus's 1492 voyage, he asked for and got very generous terms in exchange for taking the risk of exploring unknown lands. This agreement gave Columbus the title of Admiral of the Ocean Sea, a high-ranking naval title, governorship, viceroy, over all lands. He discovered 10% of all riches, gold, spices, trade found in those lands, the right to pass on his titles to his children. Spain gave him ships, a crew, and one big dream: to reach Asia before anyone else. On August 3, 1492, Columbus set sail from Palos, Spain with 3 ships, the Niña, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria. Weeks dragged on. The crew grumbled. The food rotted. Some whispered, maybe the earth is flat and we're about to fall off. But then, on October 12, 1492, a sailor spotted land. Columbus had done it, only he hadn't reached Asia. He landed in the Bahamas, part of the Caribbean, home to the peaceful Taino people. But Columbus said, perfect, these must be the Indies. And that's how the word Indian got attached to the wrong people for centuries. Long before Columbus, millions lived across the Americas. Their ancestors had crossed from Asia over 15,000 years ago via the Bering Strait, when it was still frozen land. The Bering Land Bridge was a strip of land between Siberia and Alaska, formed by glaciers that allowed animals and early humans to cross to North America. After the Bering Land Bridge was submerged by rising sea levels at the end of the last ice age, human populations in the Americas became isolated from those in Eurasia and Africa for thousands of years. This separation led to the development of distinct cultures, societies, and biological adaptations on both sides of the globe. While these groups remained biologically the same species, Homo sapiens, their long-term isolation created what some describe metaphorically as 2 worlds: the Old World, Europe, Asia, and Africa, and the New World, the Americas. They built cities, traded across mountains, and farmed rich lands. While Europe was chasing gold, they were cultivating corn, cacao, and balance. Columbus returned to Spain in March 1493 a hero, bringing parrots, cotton, and even a few captured Taino people as proof of success. He called the islands lush and filled with riches. Spain was thrilled. This voyage kicked off what historians call the Columbian Exchange, the global swap of goods, ideas, and diseases. Europe got tomatoes, chocolate, corn, and tobacco. The Americas got horses, pigs, wheat, and smallpox. By the 1500s, diseases had wiped out up to 90% of indigenous peoples in the Caribbean. And rumor has it, Europe may have gotten syphilis in return. So technically, everyone got something, just not what they wanted. In 1494, Columbus returned on his second voyage, this time with 17 ships and over 1,000 settlers. He was certain there was gold waiting to be mined. Spoiler, there wasn't. Hispaniola, today's Haiti and the Dominican Republic, but had only small traces of gold. But Columbus had promised the Spanish crown mountains of treasure, so he forced the Taino to pay a gold tax. Every adult had to bring a hawk's bell full of gold dust every few months. If they failed, they were punished, sometimes by mutilation or death. Columbus had no noble background, so he always felt he had to prove himself. When colonists questioned his authority or refused orders, he saw it as a threat to his reputation and power. He used brutal measures like flogging or hanging dissenters to remind them he was in charge. The Spanish crown wanted results, gold, land, and order. Before sugar plantations, the Caribbean in the New World had little to no value. Columbus, feeling this pressure, often took it out on both indigenous people and settlers in a desperate attempt to control the narrative and keep power. By 1495, the colony was falling apart. There wasn't enough food, settlers rebelled, and Columbus ruled with an iron fist. Executing men helped with rationing food shortage. He jailed and flogged his own men, executed rebels, and enslaved hundreds of Taino people, shipping them back to Spain in 1495 and 1496 as replacements for gold, where they didn't last for more than a year or two. Reports of cruelty piled up. By 1499, Spain had enough. They sent Francisco de Bobadilla to investigate. When Bobadilla arrived in 1500, he arrested Columbus, chained him, and shipped him back to Spain, accused of brutality, corruption, and misrule. He spent a short time in custody, but Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand quickly ordered his release. He was freed within a few weeks and granted an audience with the monarchs, who treated him with some sympathy. However, although he was released, he lost much of his power and titles, and he was never restored as governor of the Indies. Now banned from Hispaniola, Columbus wasn't finished. In 1502, he made one final voyage, his fourth, trying again to find Asia. He explored parts of Central America, Honduras, Nicaragua, and Panama, but never found the passage he dreamed of. Sick, disappointed, and broke, he returned to Spain in 1504. He died in 1506, still convinced he'd reached the outskirts of Asia. A few years later, another explorer, Amerigo Vespucci, realized these lands were not Asia, but an entirely new continent. By 1507, a German mapmaker honored him by naming it America. So Columbus discovered the New World, but Amerigo got the name. History can be cruel that way. In 1507, Waldseemüller's famous world map labeled the new continent America, crediting Vespucci for recognizing it as a separate landmass from Asia. But by 1513, in his Carta Marina, Waldseemüller did not use the name America at all, a significant reversal. This omission suggests he may have rethought Vespucci's role or realized Columbus had a stronger claim as the first European to reach the New World. However, the name America from his 1507 map had already started spreading and stuck over time. After Columbus, the floodgates opened. By the 1500s and 1600s, European powers colonized the Caribbean and the Americas. Gold and silver from Mexico and Peru poured into Spain. The Spanish governors of Mexico and Peru were often as brutal, if not more so, than Columbus. However, because these regions produced vast amounts of gold and silver, the Spanish crown largely turned a blind eye to their abuses in favor of wealth and economic gain. Sugar, cotton, and coffee fueled Europe's rise, built on the backs of enslaved Africans shipped across the Atlantic. What started with a voyage in 1492 became centuries of conquest and empire. Columbus set out to find Asia, and instead stumbled into a new world. He dreamed of glory, but his ambition unleashed one of history's biggest turning points. Some call him a hero, others a villain. Maybe he was just a man, brilliant, flawed, and human, who got lost and changed the world anyway. Columbus never actually set foot on what we now call North America, the mainland of the United States or Canada. His voyages mostly took him to the Caribbean islands, parts of Central America, and the northern coast of South America. Columbus excelled as an explorer who changed the course of world history, but failed as a governor due to cruelty and misrule.